hearing will come to order, and I want to thank you all for joining us as the subcommittee continues to shine the spotlight on and to search for a resolution to the extreme injustice being perpetrated by the Bolivian government officials against Jacob Ostreicher, an American trapped in the infamous Palmasola prison, charged with crimes for which the Bolivian government has produced no evidence, either of the crimes themselves or that of Mr. Ostreicher committed either one. He is being denied the most fundamental due process and human rights, both under Bolivian law and international human rights standards. On June 9th, Sherry Rickard, my staff director on the committee, and I went to Bolivia to meet with Mr. Ostreicher and to attend a court hearing for his release on bail, which had been repeatedly delayed since September of last year. The testimony presented at the subcommittee at the June 6th hearing about this case revealed that repeated due process violations were being committed by Bolivian officials. On June 11th, I had the opportunity to witness some of that myself. Two attorneys from the Bolivian Ministry of Government, who I understand should not be intervening in the case in the first place, aggressively threatened to take legal action against the judge if he refused to recuse himself. Although the judge rightly rejected the ludicrous reasons for which the Ministry of Government attorneys based their threat, they accomplished their goal of having the hearing postponed and Mr. Ostreicher returned to prison. To underline the absurdity of the Bolivian judicial system, Mr. Ostreicher's case was then referred to a court where the judge is detained in the same prison as Mr. Ostreicher. It took fully 6 weeks for the hearing to be rescheduled. Remember, this is a bail hearing in another court that has a judge. I've been informed that, unfortunately, the same scenario occurred on June 11th hearing that took place, and again on July 23rd. The Ministry of Government attorneys injected themselves into the hearing and aggressively threatened the judge if she failed to recuse herself. The judge rejected out of hand the basis asserted for the threat and again postponed the hearing and returned Mr. Ostreicher to jail. While in Bolivia, I met with Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs Juan Carlos Alronde, the Minister of Government Carlos Romero, and Minister of Justice Cecilia Leon Quinteros to advocate for Mr. Ostreicher's release. Each of them have made commitments with respect to this case, but sadly have not followed through. And in the meantime, Mr. Ostreicher continues to face daily threats to his life in the violent, unsanitary, drug-infested Palmasola prison. He has been on a hunger strike, as we know, since April 15th, and he was already extremely frail and weak when I saw him over a month ago. Both a private and a Bolivian government doctor have examined Mr. Ostreicher and recommended that he be referred to a medical clinic for evaluation. Given everything else that has happened in this case, it is highly suspicious that the prison officials are unable to find police escorts to take him there. Although our own State Department officials are finally acknowledging that Mr. Ostreicher's due process rights are being violated, they continue to seem hesitant and uncertain about what action to take on his behalf. The State Department was invited to testify at this hearing, but indicated that they were not available to do so this week. I do look forward to arranging a follow-up hearing at the earliest possible date when they are prepared to discuss their efforts in this case. Since undertaking my own advocacy efforts on behalf of Mr. Ostreicher in early June, I have received reports about several Americans who are imprisoned overseas and are being denied their fundamental due process and human rights. Out of a sense of obligations to do all I can to help Mr. Ostreicher, but also to assist other U.S. citizens in similar situations, I will be introducing legislation this Friday that will hold accountable those foreign government officials who are responsible for the violation of due process and human rights of imprisoned Americans. The legislation is entitled Justice for Imprisoned Americans Overseas Act, or Jacob's Law. It is premised on the principle that foreign government officials responsible for violations of fundamental due process and human rights of imprisoned U.S. citizens as well as their immediate family members, should not have the privilege of traveling to the United States while our citizens are unjustly languishing in prisons, and they are responsible for that. The bill would prohibit the issuance of a visa and deny entry to any foreign government official who is violating or failing to fulfill a responsibility to uphold the rights of imprisoned Americans. The legislation would also deny entry to such officials for 10 years if the American dies from any cause while in prison. These visa and entry prohibitions would likely would likewise apply to these officials' immediate family members. Entry to the United States would be denied only when an American's fundamental rights are being violated. Americans who violate the legitimate laws of a foreign country must accept the consequences of their crimes. But the United States cannot stand by and simply monitor the cases when our citizens are being held hostage contrary to international human rights standards. I would emphasize that already under current law, 22 U.S. Code Section 1732, the President must demand the release of any citizen who has been unjustly deprived of his liberty or by or under the authority of any foreign government, and to undertake appropriate means to obtain the release of such citizen. We're not talking about just monitoring the release of that person. This legislation provides the State Department with a tool that it should welcome in order to help it fulfill that responsibility. We are privileged to have with us today two attorneys who are representing Mr. Ostreicher in the Santa Cruz courts. I would like to thank them for coming all the way from Bolivia to participate in this hearing on Mr. Ostreicher's behalf. We will also receive an update about the case from Mr. Ostreicher's wife, Ms. Miriam Ungar, and his daughter, a constituent of mine from New Jersey, Kaya Weinberger. Finally, I would like to express my appreciation to Mr. Stephen Moore, a retired FBI special agent who has spent considerable time and effort investigating Mr. Ostreicher's case and who interrupted his book tour in Washington State just to be with us today. Thank you for that sacrifice, and thank you for the tremendous work that you have done. I'd like to now yield to my friend and colleague, Ms. Bass, the ranking member, for any opening comments she might have.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for continuing to focus on Mr. Jacob Ostreicher, the U.S. citizen and businessman held in custody in Bolivia for over 14 months. And let me just take the opportunity to commend you for your aggressive action of taking the time out and going directly to Bolivia. And as I understand in reports from that, there was concerns for your physical safety, but you took it upon yourself to do that anyway. I regret that no meaningful progress has been made toward this release since our last hearing on June 6, as his forced detention becomes more troubling each day and each minute that he remains incarcerated. Mr. Chairman, allow me to again express my deepest concern for Mr. Ostreicher and his family, who've endured such a great deal since his June 2011 detention. Mr. Ostreicher, as has been noted, has been held in detention for well over a year without due process. Hearings on this case have been postponed numerous times, including the most recent one on July 23rd. I must ask the Bolivian government, why do they continue to stall on this case? I'm aware that the Bolivian justice system allows for up to 18 months before an individual is charged. It's my understanding that this is far from the norm, and in many cases far exceed this time frame. Although the difficulty of assessing justice in Bolivia is clearly a problem that extends beyond the case of Mr. Ostreicher, I would hope that this case to be one of these, that I would hope that the necessary diplomatic and political pressures would be applied to resolve this case. Let me take the time to urge the U.S. officials to do all that is possible to find a solution to what is a crisis that divides a family and robbed a mother, wife, children of a son, husband, and father. Mrs. Unger, I emphasize with the frustration that you, your husband, and your family have endured. I say I emphasize, I can't say that I know exactly how you feel, because I don't think anybody knows how you feel unless they have been in that exact situation. But let me say again that we have not forgotten your husband, and we too are worried about his mental and physical health and well-being. I once again encourage you and all parties involved to keep channels of communication open so that every effort to bring transparency and progress to this very serious crisis can be resolved. I hope that you are able to keep the faith and believe that your husband will be returned to you and that you will soon be able to put this tragedy behind you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bass. I'd like to now turn to Mr. Turner, gentleman from New York.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Bass, thank you for calling this hearing today. Chairman Smith, let me applaud you for your effort on behalf of Jacob Ostreicher. I also want to thank Jacob's wife and daughter for coming to Washington again to share their thoughts with us. A little over a month ago, we had a similar hearing, and it was entitled, "The State Department's Inadequate Response to Human Rights Concerns in Bolivia." Frankly, this hearing could now be entitled, "The State Department's Inadequate Response to Human Rights Concerns in Bolivia, Part 2. And perhaps even that is not completely accurate because unlike movie sequels, nothing has changed. Jacob has still not been formally charged. He has been denied a hearing. He continues to live in squalor and in constant fear for his life, and his health continues to deteriorate. The State Department's response is still inadequate. They have been invited, but they have declined to testify, claiming that it is better to work behind the scenes. The strategy has been employed for over a year, and I ask, what are the results? So if the State Department were here, I would have one question. What are you doing to help him? He has been detained without a hearing, no trial, no jury, no verdict, no due process, Mr. Chairman. I believe Jacob's family deserves to know what is going on, and I hope the State Department will answer that question. Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Turner, thank you very much. I now recognize the gentlelady from New York, Anne-Marie Burkle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me begin by saying thank you to all of our witnesses and to Mr. Ostreicher's family for being here today. I know how difficult this is, but we need you to help us raise awareness about the issue and all of the challenges that he faces. So thank you very much for your courage to be here and to help us do our job even better. I just want to thank the chairman. We are very fortunate to have a chairman such as Mr. Smith, who has the courage to continue to focus on these human rights violations throughout the world, and who has been steadfast, and as was mentioned by the ranking member, by his trip to Bolivia, and again, the courage it takes to call attention and to remain vigilant on behalf of not only Mr. Ostreicher, but also his family. I look forward to hearing your testimony today. It's going to take all of Congress and this administration. It's going to take a concerted effort for us to get him the liberty and the freedom that he needs, and we want to pledge that to you. We will remain steadfast, and we will continue to work on his behalf as well as yours. I thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Burkle. I'd like to now welcome to the witness table our very distinguished witnesses, beginning first with Yimi Montaño Villa Gomez, who obtained his legal license at the Universidad and a master's degree as well, both in Santa Cruz in Bolivia. He is admitted to the Bolivian bar. He has been the principal at the law firm of Montaño and Associates for the past 2 years and has represented Mr. Ostreicher since January of 2012. We'll then hear from Yerjes Justinano, who attended the School of Universidad, the Adventist University of Chile, and obtained his license in law as well in Santa Cruz. He has completed a master's program in criminal law and is awaiting to present his thesis. He is also admitted to the Bolivian bar and has been a partner in the firm that he heads since 2000. Mr. Giussiano has represented Mr. Ostreicher in this case since November and December of 2011, and again since March of 2012. We'll then hear from Miriam Ungar, who is the wife of Mr. Jacob Ostreicher. She has visited Mr. Ostreicher in Bolivia numerous times, both prior to and after his arrest. She has gone from having the normal life of a resident of Brooklyn, New York, to being the lead advocate for her husband imprisoned in a foreign country with a different language, different culture, and an incomprehensible disregard for fundamental human rights and legal due process. She has striven to help her husband maintain his physical well-being and mental sanity in horrendous prison conditions. Ms. Ungar, once again, I commend you and thank you for your courage and your fidelity to your husband. When Sherry and I met with him, he spoke about you and Kai and the family almost nonstop, about how much he just longs to be with both of you. And it was really, really extraordinary how much he misses you and cherishes the family and both of you. We'll then hear from Kaya Weinberger, the daughter of Mr. Ostreicher. Ms. Weinberger is married and the mother of 5 small children. She is a resident of Lakewood, New Jersey, in my district, which I have the honor of representing. And she's also visited her father in the notorious Palomasolo prison in Bolivia and has attended several of his hearings. We are deeply appreciative of her willingness, and again, to the both of you, thank you so much. We then will hear from Mr. Stephen Moore, who served as an FBI special agent and supervisory special agent for 25 years, retiring in 2008. Mr. Moore led the investigations of many high-profile crimes in Los Angeles, including the first-ever conviction for an anthrax threat and the Buford Furrow shooting murder spree at the Jewish Community Center. He spent several years on SWAT and was a case agent for Los Angeles 9/11 investigation, and later chosen to supervise all al-Qaeda investigations for the Los Angeles FBI. In 2003, Mr. Moore stood up the FBI squad in charge of responding to acts of terrorism against the U.S. in Asia and Pakistan, including the bombings of the U.S. consulate in Karachi and the J.W. Marriott Hotel in Jakarta. He established liaison and worked closely with the CIA, the U.S. Department of State, in several countries, conducting investigations out at least 6 U.S. embassies. Mr. Moore also served a term as assistant legal attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Nassau, Bahamas, during the summer of 2004. In his retirement, Mr. Moore has written a book entitled Special Agent Man, My Life in the FBI as a Terrorist Hunter, Helicopter Pilot, and Certified Sniper, which was just recently released. He also has voluntarily undertaken to use his enormous skills and experience that he acquired as an FBI special agent to help exonerate Americans wrongly incarcerated abroad, including Amanda Knox, who was convicted in 2009 in Italy of murdering a roommate. Of course, because of his work, largely, the evidence was shown to be bogus, and she is now free. In his capacity, he went to Bolivia in early April of 2012 to visit Mr. Ostreicher and to investigate his case, and we welcome him back as well. Mr. Montano, if you would proceed with your testimony.
Gracias, señor presidente y miembros de esta comisión. Mi nombre es Jimmy Montaño, ciudadano de Bolivia. Abogado del señor Jacob Ostreicher. Agradezco a este comité la oportunidad
I thank this committee for the opportunity
de poder transmitir una crítica noticia. Un ciudadano suyo agoniza en una cárcel de Bolivia.
I come here to transmit.
Este ciudadano tiene la particularidad de ser inocente.
come here to transmit to you very important news, which is that a citizen of yours, of this country, is dying in a Bolivian prison.
Conozco en su integridad el caso
I know his case entirely,
y no existe duda alguna en mi persona
and I have absolutely no doubt
de la inocencia del señor Ostreicher.
regarding Mr. Ostreicher's innocence.
Bolivia vive un momento difícil, particularmente la Administración de Justicia,
Bolivia is going through a very difficult time, particularly in the Ministry of Justice,
toda vez que existe una concentración total del poder en el gobierno central.
there is still a complete concentration of power in the central government.
Y esa concentración de poder hoy se ha volcado en contra del ciudadano Ostreicher, sometiéndolo a un proceso
And this concentration of power today has turned completely against Mr. Ostreicher, subjecting him to a trial
que le ha quitado la libertad,
which has, or prosecution, which has robbed him of his freedom.
está atentando contra su vida, su salud,
It is attacking his life, his health.
En este proceso no se han respetado mínimamente las leyes, no se han respetado sus derechos, sus garantías que le asisten como ciudadano sometido a la jurisdicción de Bolivia.
In this prosecution, there has been not even the least respect for the laws and constitutional rights, which as a citizen, he should be allowed to have through the Bolivian legal system.
Esta ilegal y despiadada persecución que se ha iniciado en contra del señor Ostreicher tiene por 14 meses detenido a un inocente en condiciones nada saludables y se ha venido burlando durante más de 20 audiencias que no le permiten demostrar o poder recuperar su libertad mínimamente, y de un tiempo a esta parte, a pesar del crítico estado de salud,
This illegal and cruel prosecution of Mr. Ostreicher has been going on for the last 14 months. There is an innocent man who is in horrific conditions. His health is suffering, and for the last 20 hearings, he has been not allowed to recover his freedom.
no le permiten siquiera recibir la asistencia especializada de un médico. Esta situación, por demás de abusiva, es producto de aquella concentración y mal uso del poder que se está dando y tiene como sus víctimas al señor Ostreicher.
He's not even been allowed the assistance of a doctor in this situation. And this comes about as a result of a bad use and abuse of power which has fallen upon Mr. Ostreicher.
Si mínimamente no se han respetado su derecho a la vida, a la salud, es una locura pensar que se van a respetar sus derechos y garantías procesales establecidas en la ley vigente.
If his rights to life and health have not been respected, how is it possible that he would be given due process according to the existing laws?
Esto se ve reflejado porque continuamente el Ministerio de Gobierno o funcionarios del Ministerio de Gobierno no permiten que se desarrolle una audiencia para recobrar la libertad del señor Ostreicher, prolongando su detención.
This is reflected in the fact that there are continuing efforts by the Ministry of Government and the officials working for that ministry who will not allow a bail hearing to be heard to see whether he would be able to regain his freedom.
Todos los derechos que le puedan asistir al señor Ostreicher, sean en tratados internacionales, en las leyes de Bolivia han quedado reducidos al texto.
All of the rights, whether they be in international treaties or through Bolivian laws to which he should be entitled, have been left on paper.
No podemos imaginar un debido proceso cuando no existe una independencia en los poderes.
We can't imagine there being due process when there's no independence of the different branches.
Y cuando el Ministerio Público de Bolivia y los jueces actúan a solicitud del gobierno y cuando se rehúsan a hacerlo son perseguidos y procesados.
When the prosecutor's office from Bolivia and the judges act at the behest of the government, and when they refuse to do so, are removed from office.
Sistemáticamente le han arrebatado el derecho a la libertad, han comprometido su derecho a la vida, a la salud, se han apropiado de su patrimonio, lo han separado de su familia.
His right to freedom has continually been compromised, as have his life, his health, his belongings, and his right to be with his family.
Él siendo inocente sigue detenido y personas que cometen crímenes, inclusive contra él, aún mantienen su libertad.
Although he is innocent, he continues to be detained, while people who commit crimes, even crimes against him, continue to be free.
No sé hacerle un pedido exacto de qué su gobierno podría hacer. Solo los invoco, los insto a que cualquier acción que puedan tomar sea la adecuada y en tiempo oportuno, porque quizás esta historia no tenga un final feliz.
I don't know what to tell you to ask exactly of your government. I would only plead you and encourage you to act in the most appropriate and timely fashion possible. If not, this story may not have a happy ending.
Su vida está gravemente comprometida.
His life is gravely compromised.
Su salud muy debilitada
He's quite weakened,
y su familia lo necesita de retorno para estar nuevamente juntos.
and his family needs him back so that he can be with them once again.
Gracias, señor presidente, señores miembros, por esta oportunidad de decir mi verdad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the members of the subcommittee for this opportunity to tell my truth.
Ms. Montano, thank you very much for your testimony and for your courage, both of the attorneys, to be here. Ms. Bass and I were just talking. It shows tremendous courage and bravery for both of you to come to the United States and to be here, knowing the impunity, especially the prosecutorial impunity that currently reigns in Bolivia, and we're seeing it with Jacob's case. So thank you for your testimony. Mr. Justin Iano.
Buenas tardes, señor presidente y señores miembros de este comité.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, and to the members of this subcommittee.
En primer lugar, es necesario hacerles conocer que dentro de mi carrera profesional no atiendo casos relacionados con el narcotráfico.
I first need to tell you that in my professional career, I do not take drug trafficking cases.
Por esa razón, cuando el señor Ostreicher me pidió que revise sus antecedentes, luego de revisar que no existe ninguna evidencia en contra de él, peor aún relacionada con el narcotráfico, decidí aceptar el caso.
So when Mr. Ostreicher asked me to take a look at his case, and after I found no evidence to the effect that he was at all implicated or implicated in drug trafficking. It was only then that I accepted his case.
Por otro lado, debo indicar que lamentablemente el sistema judicial boliviano no es algo de lo que particularmente me sienta orgulloso.
I also have to say that, unfortunately, I am not particularly proud of the Bolivian judicial system.
Los niveles de corrupción, de injerencia política, de injerencia económica y la falta de capacidad e idoneidad de los jueces hacen que este sistema judicial sea un sistema débil.
The levels of corruption, political and economic machinations, the lack of independence for the judges makes this system extremely weak.
Y digo esto porque este sistema judicial o estas características del sistema judicial son los que han influido en el caso del señor Ostreicher.
And I would say that this, just because these political characteristics, these characteristics in general, have had a great impact on Mr. Ostreicher's case.
Este testimonio para mí particularmente resulta un tanto difícil por dos razones.
This testimony is difficult for me for two reasons.
La primera de ellas por una razón personal, toda vez que considero que el gobierno boliviano ha tenido una injerencia en el caso del señor Ostreicher y particularmente o personalmente tengo una vinculación con el gobierno. Mi padre actualmente es embajador de Bolivia en el Brasil.
This is because the process, the Bolivian government and through the Ministry of Government has directly interfered in the case. And it becomes difficult for me personally, as well as the political reasons, because of personal ties that I have. My father has been named ambassador of Bolivia in Brazil.
Entonces, de alguna manera, estoy relacionado con el gobierno. Por otro lado, es difícil tratar de venir a explicarles la situación legal de un ciudadano americano en un sistema legal distinto al de ustedes.
So I have political ties to the personal ties to the government. However, it's also difficult for me because it's hard to explain the situation of an American citizen in a completely different legal system.
A pesar de ello, los derechos humanos son derechos humanos para todos los humanos. Y en este caso en particular se han vulnerado los derechos humanos del señor Jacob Ostreicher, esencialmente en la parte procesal.
In spite of that, human rights are human rights for anybody and everybody. And in this particular case, it's the human rights of Mr. Jacob Ostreicher that have been violated.
Solamente para que ustedes puedan comprender a cabalidad, tanto un fiscal como un juez han indicado que el delito del señor Ostreicher es no haber demostrado la legalidad de su dinero.
And particularly this is the case with the procedural aspects of this. So I think it might be hard for you to understand fully this, but in this particular case, both the prosecutor and a judge have indicated that it is impossible to say that he has committed the crime because he has not proven the legality of his financing.
No ha desvirtuado, dicen las autoridades bolivianas, no ha desvirtuado las relaciones que tiene con otras personas, no ha desvirtuado la legalidad de los recursos económicos y por esa razón el señor Ostreicher está detenido preventivamente.
The Bolivian authorities have said that he has not denied the ties with these other people and the illegality of the financing, and therefore he is guilty.
Podrán ser distintos los sistemas judiciales, el americano y el boliviano, pero ambos tienen como garantía principal la presunción de inocencia, es decir, que quien acusa debe probar la culpabilidad de alguien. Eso no ha existido en el caso de Jacob Ostreicher.
While they may be different, the Bolivian and the American legal systems, there is in fact one guiding principle in both of them, which is the presumption of innocence, which means that the accuser must in fact prove the guilt of the party, and this has not happened at all in the case of Mr. Jacob Ostreicher.
Una vez que se solicitó que cese la detención preventiva, un juez analizó la prueba que se le presentó por parte de la defensa del señor Ostreicher y determinó que evidentemente el señor Ostreicher demostraba la legalidad de sus recursos y otorgó la libertad.
As soon as there was a request to end the preventive detention of Mr. Ostreicher, and a judge reviewed the evidence provided by the defense, he decided that, in fact, there was no evidence to indicate that there was any illegal source of the funding. And he was granted his freedom.
Sin embargo, curiosamente, a los 6 días, ese juez, sin que nadie se lo pida, de oficio, cambió su opinión y determinó nuevamente la detención del señor Ostreicher.
Curiously enough, 6 days later, that same judge, without word from or to anybody, changed his opinion and ordered his detention once again.
Como mencionaba el abogado Montaño, han existido más de 20 audiencias suspendidas debido a la injerencia directa del Ministerio de Gobierno de Bolivia en el sistema judicial boliviano.
As Mr. Montaño stated, there have been over 20 hearings that have not been held because of interference by the Bolivian Ministry of Government on the Bolivian justice system.
No puedo indicar las razones de esa injerencia, pero puedo afirmar que existe injerencia por parte del Ministerio de Gobierno en el proceso de Jacob Ostreicher.
I cannot give you the reasons behind this interference, but I can definitely say that there is interference by the Ministry of Government on Mr. Jacob Ostreicher's case.
Puedo identificar funcionarios como, por ejemplo, Fernando Rivera Tardío, Denis Rodas Limachi, como funcionarios que persistentemente intimidan, amenazan a los jueces, de los cuales inclusive el señor presidente ha sido testigo de una de esas audiencias.
I can identify public officials like Fernando Rivera Rubachi and
Denis Rodas.
And Denis Rodas, who have directly interfered in the government and interfered in this procedure, and you, Mr. Chairman, have seen it yourself.
Considero particularmente que con este caso no solamente se ha puesto en riesgo la libertad y la salud del señor Jacob Ostreicher, sino además el sistema democrático boliviano.
I personally believe that it is not only Jacob Ostreicher who is at risk because of his health and because of his illegal prosecution, but the Bolivian justice system is also at risk.
La democracia tiene como pilares la división de poderes y la no injerencia entre ellos. En el momento que el poder ejecutivo amenaza a un juez, pone en riesgo la democracia.
The democracy has certain pillars and separation of powers, and as soon as the executive branch interferes with the judicial branch by threatening a judge, democracy itself is threatened.
Finalmente, indicarles que no entiendo la razón por la cual un ciudadano americano que decidió invertir en Bolivia, generar fuentes de empleo, sea en este momento tratado de la forma en cómo está siendo tratado.
And finally, I would like to state that I cannot understand why a U.S. citizen who decided to invest in Bolivia and who decided to create jobs in Bolivia is being treated the way he is treated.
Jacob Ostreicher en sus empresas pagaba un salario mayor a lo que paga el gobierno boliviano a un policía.
Jacob Ostreicher's companies would pay higher salaries than what the Bolivian government pay its police officers.
Sin embargo, está detenido preventivamente y con una injerencia directa del gobierno, razón por la que considero esto más que una ilegalidad como una completa injusticia. Muchas gracias, señor presidente, señores miembros del comité.
Still, he is being held illegally with no reason and through direct interference on behalf of the government. That is why I consider this not only illegal, but truly unjust. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your time.
Mr. Justiniano, thank you very much. Again, to both of you, again, I can't underscore for the American audience how courageous it is for you to come here and testify. But having been in the courtroom and watching what I truly thought was a stellar representation on behalf of Jacob, despite the intimidation tactics that were clearly on display, and despite the judge who went from being confident in the morning to being a nervous wreck because he was so fearful about what the sword of Damocles that was hanging over his head. And you two gentlemen were in the court standing up on behalf of Jacob and coming here now to Washington. I would hope the people of Bolivia would realize that you have given a great deal of encouragement to all of us that Bolivian democracy in the future, providing people of your stature are involved and robustly involved with the democracy, has a great future. Very often it's the defense attorneys and their stand for human rights and human dignity that determines which course a country takes. And so I want to say how this subcommittee applauds you for the stellar defense you're providing for Jacob, but also for your courage. Ms. Unger?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the subcommittee for taking the time to hear my testimony today. My name is Miriam Unger, and I'm the wife of Jacob Ostreicher, a 53-year-old American citizen currently detained in Santa Cruz, Bolivia. As I've already testified on June 6 before this subcommittee, I will only give a short recap of my husband's story. On December 26, 2010, Jacob went to Santa Cruz, Bolivia to take over management of a rice business after investors suspected that the local manager they hired was embezzling money from the company. When Jacob arrived in Bolivia, the local manager was nowhere to be found, and Jacob immediately hired lawyers to start filing criminal and civil charges against her. Before she fled, the local manager purchased a parcel of land from a man wanted in Brazil in the 1990s. When Bolivian authorities realized that the company was operating on his land, they raided Jacob's office and deposed him. Even though Jacob did not purchase the land himself, Jacob cooperated fully with the authorities and notified the U.S. Embassy of the deposition. After enduring 2 additional depositions, Jacob was arrested on June 3, 2011. At the arraignment, the prosecutors alleged criminal organization and money laundering. It is my understanding that no evidence was reviewed by the judge. Following 3 postponements, on September 23, 2011, a judge ordered Jacob's release on bail based on evidence submitted, only to reverse his decision 6 days later. Of the 22 hearings that have been scheduled, 19 hearings were postponed. Most of the stated excuses for these postponements were illegal. During Jacob's last 2 scheduled hearings, the Bolivian Ministry of Government resorted to a new tactic to postpone Jacob's hearings. Mr. Chairman, as you mentioned before, at the June 11th hearing, the legal advisor to the Minister of Government demanded that the third judge, and by law the higher court that he referred it to, must make a decision within 48 hours. They failed to do that. They did not follow due process. 42 days later, on July 23rd, the 22nd scheduled hearing in Jacob's case, Jacob was brought into the courtroom only to hear a repeat of what occurred at the June 11th hearing. The fourth judge on Jacob's case was ordered to recuse herself by the Minister of Government's legal advisor. She refused. The legal advisor threatened to file charges against her. The judge refused but referred it to a higher court anyway. By law, the higher court must make a decision within 48 hours. It is now August 1st, and we are still waiting. Today marks 426 days that my husband, Jacob Ostreicher, has been incarcerated in Palmasola prison without being formally charged with a crime. Palmasola is a notorious prison ruled by the most hardened criminals. Every day that Jacob remains in that prison is another day that his life remains in constant danger. I am beyond frustrated by the Bolivian government's consistent interference in my husband's case, resulting in a denial of his due process and basic human rights. Although I'm aware of the shortcomings of the Bolivian justice system, I believe that what my husband has endured is more than the average prisoner in Bolivia. Evidenced by the two most recent hearings in his case, the Ministry of Government is playing an active role in preventing Jacob from having his case heard. I would like to address a report I received from the U.S. Embassy on a meeting on July 5, 2012, with Roberto Desiccus from the United Nations High Commission of Human Rights in Bolivia. I received their report on July 12. Following the meeting, the U.S. Embassy reported that it is the opinion of the UNHCHR office in Bolivia that Jacob is not being persecuted or targeted by the government, but rather he is yet another victim of a brutally slow, inefficient, underfunded, and corrupt judicial system. According to the UNHCHR, the procedural delays, the rotation of prosecutors, the recusal of judges, and the apparent lack of hard evidence in Jacob's case are all factors which are common in the majority of cases in the Bolivian judicial system. As our Bolivian attorneys attested, the totality of what Jacob has experienced is not common. Moreover, even if it was, the UNHCHR, an international body charged with upholding and advocating for international standards of human rights, should not sit idly by and accept it, nor, in my opinion, should the U.S. government. Jacob is a U.S. citizen, and the U.S. government should do everything in its power to ensure respect for his right and due process, regardless of how unjust, slow, and corrupt the justice system in Bolivia is. I am utterly distraught and frustrated beyond words that it has been 15 months since the crisis began, and we are still right where we are in June of 2011. We have not moved forward in this case. 15 months in prison just seems to flow so easily from our mouths, but 15 months is a milestone in the life of a human being. In the 15 months that Jacob has been kept hostage in a foreign country, his grandchildren have learned to walk, to talk, and some even started school. These are lost milestones that can never be recovered. In summary, Mr. Chairman, Jacob's rights are continuously being violated every second that he remains in prison. The last two hearings in his case have provided evidence that he is being targeted by the Bolivian government, and thus I hope the United States government will continue to advocate for and protect its citizens. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to appear before you and this subcommittee today.
Thank you again, Ms. Unger, for your, as I said at the outset, from your steadfast advocacy, effective, aggressive, all completely indwelled by the love for your husband. Thank you for, again, your advocacy. Ms. Weinberger?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and other members of the subcommittee for bringing my father's plight to the forefront and for scheduling this hearing. I will never forget all that you have done for my family during this time of crisis and will be forever grateful. The image of my dear innocent father accompanies me as I speak before you this afternoon. It is an image that causes me to shudder when I think of it. His face is swollen with hunger. His skin is pale and lifeless. But his eyes are alive. They are very much alive and filled with longing, pleading with me to try with all my waning energy to rescue him before it's, God forbid, too late. He still hopes, after all these months, for freedom and liberty back home in the land that he loves. I cannot let him down. And so, although it is very hard for me to be in the limelight once again, I appeal to you, the government of my homeland. My father's situation has not changed in the slightest since his detention 426 days ago. It has been a long, painful year filled with letdowns and postponed hearings, and we have just had enough. We are enraged at the injustices, lies, and scandalous acts that are being committed against my father. We have tried going patiently through the Bolivian legal system and bearing with their way of governing, but they have shown us that their justice system is flawed beyond repair. Rather than pursue justice for victims and the accused alike, the Bolivian justice system appears to be a vehicle for political maneuvering. I have been appalled by what I have witnessed firsthand while in attendance at one of my father's hearings in Bolivia. At my father's very first scheduled hearing, the judge was texting on his BlackBerry and even answered a phone call while the defense lawyers were arguing their case. Although I was not in attendance at my father's most recent hearings, we have learned that the Minister of Government requested that the judges should recuse themselves, a political maneuver to postpone my father's hearing for as long as possible, done in the course of a hearing for everyone to witness. How can my father possibly be receiving fair treatment in a country with a government that does not even bother to hide its corruption? How much longer must he wait and wonder when his salvation will come? For it will not come through the Bolivian justice system. Time has shown us that. It is clear to us that his only chance for liberation is if the American government will jump into action and demand his freedom from his captors before it's too late. He deserves to be free. It is my sincere belief that the only reason for his being kept hostage is because he stood for the American ideals of free enterprise and capitalism, and the Bolivian government saw him as a threat to its way of life and control of the rice markets. The abuse and torture my innocent father is going through, both mentally and physically, would stun the mind of any sane person. I have seen it with my own eyes. It was so ghastly, I felt as if I were in a horror movie. Sewage runs through the streets of the huge prison. There are no guards to protect the inmates, and the only security comes from other inmates. Fistfights erupt between the prisoners often. It is a common occurrence for a corpse to be carried out. It is a scene from a nightmare, and my dear father is living this nightmare daily. Every day that he is being kept there, his basic human rights are being violated. Our website is being visited daily by hundreds of people who are praying and care very much about my father. More than 35,000 people have signed a petition to the White House in support of his release from detention. These people see how the Bolivian government has perverted justice, and they are sickened by it. They want to see their country act on behalf of their fellow citizen. My father is literally clinging on to his sanity. He tells me that the one thought that gives him the strength to endure is the hope that the American government will do everything in its power to secure his release. He often stares at the American flag painted on the wall by his cell and dreams about the day when he will proudly sing the Song of Liberty in salute to his homeland. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, let's show my father that his dreams will become a reality. Show him and the world that America is what it professes to be, a country that stands for liberty, a land that will fight for her citizens, a country that will not allow its innocent citizen be kept hostage in a foreign country and won't let anyone stand in her quest for truth. Prove that American citizenship is a commodity worth having, and that the Star-Spangled Banner will triumph once again over those who mock all she stands for. that she will not stay in my father's cell in the Palmasola prison, but will rather be carried back with my father to the greatest nation on earth. Let her be back where she belongs, together with my father, dual witnesses to the supremacy of their country, the United States of America. Please do everything in your power to bring my father back to his homeland, back to his children and grandchildren, before it's too late, and for all the time and effort that you're investing in this cause. May God bless you all. May God bless my father, and may God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Weinberger. Mr. Moore.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Bass, and distinguished members of the committee, I want to thank you again for your diligence in keeping this before the American public. And I want to thank Mr. Justiniano and Montano. They are brave men for doing this. We know what could happen in Bolivia. When I was in the FBI, if I did an undercover or a SWAT operation, I slept at home. Nobody knew where I lived. These people go back to a country after appearing here, and people know where they live. I want to thank you again. The damage that has been done to my confidence in the government by the inaction of the State Department has been in many ways rebuilt by the actions of this committee and Mr. Smith in particular. The legislation that I've just found out about and done as much research as I can here, it addresses a vast governmental blind spot that is costing people part of lives and entire lives. This is essential legislation. In 25 years of working for the government, I have never seen such egregious inaction by any department of the government as I'm seeing by the State Department. And I say this as somebody who worked in an embassy. I don't think it's endemic to necessarily everybody in state. There are brave people in state, but there are cowards in state too. This I will do, Mr. Smith, whatever I can do to assist in support of this legislation. I am bothered by the State Department inferring that they're doing something behind the scenes. Notice that they never said they were doing anything behind the scenes. They're saying we prefer to do things behind the scenes. I would think that if the State Department was doing anything, even behind the scenes, they might appear in one of these hearings and they might give some kind of wink and a nod to a member of the committee. But they're not. We used to say in the FBI that sometimes what you didn't see was better evidence than what you saw. What I don't see is the best evidence I see of exactly what the State Department is not doing. When I testified before, I then followed up with an investigative report, which was provided to the UN High Commission on Human Rights by Mr. Smith's office. In that, I noted more than 9 violations, egregious, obvious violations that are not subjective, they're objective violations in the custody alone of Mr. Ostreicher. For instance, according to the first UN Congress in 1955, of which Bolivia and the United States are participants, untried prisoners shall be kept separate from convicted prisoners. Mr. Ostreicher is kept with serial rapists, mass murderers. The person who claims to protect him has only killed 1 or 2 people, so I'm sure he feels much more reassured by that. That's a violation of international treaty. Where sleeping accommodations are in an individual cell or rooms, each prisoner shall occupy by night a cell or room by himself. Mr. Ostreicher and many of the prisoners slept outside, and many of the prisoners still sleep outside on garbage heaps because you have to pay to have a cell. There should be regular supervision by night in keeping with the nature of the institution. There is not. The only monitoring I saw in that prison at night was when the guards fired over our heads to intimidate us. All accommodation provided for the use of prisoners, and in particular all sleeping accommodations, shall meet all minimum requirements for health due to being climactic conditions, in part particularly due to cubic content of air, minimum floor space, lighting, heating, ventilation, etc. There's no such thing as that. Raw sewage runs through the street. This is a squalid cesspool. Mosquitoes are everywhere. There is no hygiene. Their garbage dumps are literally in living spaces. No prisoner shall be employed in the service of any institution in any disciplinary capacity. We know that lifers, murderers, serial rapists are the internal security for that prison. That's not a nuanced phrase about how things are run in there. That is the de facto government-approved manner of maintaining internal discipline. All parts of the institution regularly used by prisoners shall be maintained and kept scrupulously clean at all times. I refer you to my comments on raw sewage and open garbage heaps. Corporal punishment, punishment by placing in a dark cell, and all cruel, inhuman, or degrading punishments shall be completely prohibited as punishments for disciplinary offenses. Coincidentally, every single one of those practices are undertaken at Palmasola. The medical officers shall daily visit prisoners undergoing punishment. There is no doctor at Palmasola. They have trouble getting a doctor to come into the prison because it's so dangerous. This information was provided to the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights. It had to be provided by the State Department, and when the State Department met with the United States, or with the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights, they filed a report because they were watching carefully what's going on, and said that basically the legal procedure in Bolivia is corrupt, it's brutal. These are quotes. These are not my adaptations of this. It is corrupt, brutal, slow, inefficient, underfunded. And that's okay. What they said was, this is their procedure. Therefore, if it's corrupt, if it's brutally slow, inefficient, and underfunded, because that's the way it is, that's okay. What if the Bolivians were to enact tomorrow stoning for accused prisoners? That would be under the Bolivian law. Would State Department go ahead with that? The fact that it is a part or claimed to be a part of a law does not make it legitimate. And State Department hiding behind corruption in a country like Bolivia it's the worst type of duplicity. On the State Department's website today is a statement that says, "We work to ensure that Americans are afforded due process under local laws." I don't believe that to be true. On the State Department website today, it also says the State Department is committed to ensuring fair and humane treatment for American citizens imprisoned overseas. I have just mentioned 9 violations of international law that I witnessed and photographed while I was in Bolivia. If the State Department is committed to ensuring fair and humane treatment for American citizens imprisoned overseas, what standards do they use, and how are they going to enforce it? When the report came back to Ms. Unger on their meeting with the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights, not one mention was made of the violations of Jacob's captivity. It was ignored. They discussed the legal procedure, but more than half the report dealt with the illegal and inhumane treatment he was receiving in prison, yet it wasn't addressed. We don't have dumb people in state. They knew that more than half this report had to do with illegal procedures in his captivity, yet they didn't even address it. Committee members, they didn't forget. These people are not fools. It did not serve their purposes to discuss it. This is embarrassing to me as somebody who served his country and who loves his country, who has friends in state. There are people I admire in state. But if we are depending upon other governments to tell us what's okay for our citizens, the State Department is nothing more than a rubber stamp for despotic governments. There needs to be, as this legislation proposes, a way to hold state, all of state, not just the good people, but the people who are career-oriented. There needs to be a means to hold them to their responsibilities to the American people. My dad used to tell me that fences aren't necessary until the cow leans up against it. I think it is important that the good people of state are not betrayed by the inaction of the other people in state who should be held in line by this type of legislation. Or there should be an organization within state dedicated to the investigation of Americans overseas who are held. I agree 100% with Representative Smith. I put Americans in jail for 25 years. If an American earns his way into a prison overseas, fine. That's fine. I am not here to, I'm not so xenophobic as to say that all Americans in prison overseas should be released. They shouldn't. But they should at least be held to some type of decent treatment, and the legal process should be valid, because some of those people are really innocent. I've heard recently that 70% of Bolivian prison inmates, not jail inmates, prison inmates, have not received a trial. Is that okay with state? If Jacob Ostreicher dies in Palmasola prison, both the Bolivian government and the United States Department of State will have the same blood on their hands. And again, I want to thank the attorneys from Bolivia, because they show us that our struggle here is not against a people, it's not against a country, it's not America gets its way. It is simply that we are fighting corrupt governments and trying to help the good people of those governments reclaim the name that their countries deserve. Thank you.
Mr. Moore, thank you so very much, especially given your background. I think you bring an enormous gravitas to Jacob's innocence, the denial of due process rights, which has been pervasive and systematic. And again, I thank you for taking time out of your work to fly here, to be here, to advocate and to provide insights on behalf of Jacob Ostreicher. You know, it does strike me, and you made a very strong point about and your final point about the blood being on the hands of those both in the government of Bolivia and those at state who have been asleep at the switch or indifferent or whatever it might be. And I would have to say, you know, there were people that, especially the people in the consular affairs, that were very robust in their concerns about Jacob, and I mean deeply concerned about him. And even people within the embassy who had, you know, a knowledge, and they seemed to, you know, after Miriam Unger's testimony and yours and Ms. Weinberger at the previous hearing, seemed to have gotten more up to speed on the policy side of state. But it doesn't seem to go any further. And I think that's where the huge tragedy is, because I have found in 32 years as a member of Congress that despotic governments look at how high up the chain of command are the concerns being expressed. We are the legislative branch. We do write the laws, and we do oversight. And the fact that state is not here is disconcerting. Maybe they had a good reason, but I would have loved to have had them here. We will re-invite them. You know, this invitation is an open one to them. But where is, with all due respect, President Obama? Where is Secretary of State Hillary Clinton when it comes to Jacob Ostreicher? Have they contacted Evo Morales, picked up the phone and said, Mr. President, You need to personally look into this. I was amazed when I met with Mr. Romero, the Minister of Governments, when he said, and counsel might want to speak to this, that it was Jacob and his lawyers who sought delays for bail hearings. And I said, time out, Mr. Minister. First of all, it defies the straight face test, as we say, and defies all logic to suggest that a man would want to stay in prison and would delay a bail hearing. This wasn't about the substance of the non-case, because there is no evidence and there is no charges. It's about bail. And I said, you know, when you say things like that, it strains credulity about where are you getting your information. So you might want to speak to that in a moment. You did say, Mr. Moore, that there's egregious inaction on the part of the government. And again, where is the president? As I said in my opening comments, it is in law that who has been unjustly deprived of his liberty by or under the authority of any foreign government and to undertake appropriate means to obtain the release of such citizen. Has it gotten to the point? And again, I wanted State to be here so we could ask that question. It wasn't until this committee, I think, began to raise the questions that it even went up to an assistant secretary level. And that was when we did the letter, my colleagues and I, because a OAS meeting was being held, and we asked that it be raised by that official who was on her way there. But and then that conversation, we're told, was simply this: raise Jacob's case. The person on the Bolivian side, that's not my jurisdiction, but I'll pass on your concerns. We need to take it to a much higher level. If you might want to speak to that, Mr. Moore. I do think if the president were to get on the phone, he is meeting with people. He doesn't even have to meet with them. Just get on the phone and call Evo Morales and say, Jacob must be free. Because if he, as you said in the beginning, Yemi, about if he is a dying man, I saw it myself. His health has deteriorated. From a purely humanitarian point of view, why wouldn't the Bolivian government want to, from a purely humanitarian point of view, put him on a plane and send him back to his family? So if you wanted to speak to any of those issues, especially that one about to counsel about the delays were sought by Jacob for his bail. He didn't want to get out of jail. He wanted to stay in jail. It's ludicrous.
Si me permiten, como usted, señor presidente, acaba de indicar, es pues absolutamente contradictorio que alguien que busca su libertad sea el que dilate el desarrollo del proceso. Jacob no ha suspendido ni ha solicitado la suspensión de una sola audiencia y se han suspendido más de 20.
Yes, Mr. Chair, as you were saying, it defies belief and is contradictory that a person who is seeking their freedom would in fact request a continuance or ask for a suspension of the hearings, and there have been more than 20 hearings that have been suspended.
En muchos casos, en el sistema judicial boliviano, evidentemente los procesados dilatan el desarrollo del proceso, demoran el desarrollo del proceso. Ese no es el caso de Jacob Ostreicher, donde somos los abogados los que constantemente pedimos la realización de audiencias y reclamamos cada vez que una audiencia es suspendida.
It is the case in many of the cases that go before the Bolivian justice system that defendants try to slow down the process. However, that is not the case with Jacob Ostreicher. We, the attorneys, can state that, in fact, again and again, when a case has been continued, we protest that and ask for the case to be heard.
Podemos afirmar entonces que la expresión que el señor Jacob y sus abogados son los que demoran el proceso es falsa.
So we can state that when they say that it is we, his attorneys, and Mr. Jacob Ostreicher who have been requesting the continuances, that is completely false.
Señor presidente, esa es una más de las mentiras que el gobierno va a utilizar para encubrir su crimen.
Mr. Chairman, this is yet another one of the lies that the government will use to cover its crime.
Es una mentira que solo en la cabeza de una persona que trata de encubrir delitos que vienen cometiendo, tratan de justificar una detención por más de 15 meses, ilegal y más que todo a un ciudadano inocente.
It's another lie which only a person who is in fact trying to cover their own crimes would use when we're talking about a person who has been detained illegally, who is innocent for the last 15 months.
Utilizarán esa y miles de excusas más
They will use that and a million other excuses
para encubrir tamaño crimen.
in order to cover their own crimes.
Anne Marie Burkle, I know you have to leave for another appointment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess, first of all, again, thank you all for being here and for your courage and for your willingness to sit here and tell us what is going on. What is the possible motivation of the government to do this to an American? What if you know, other than you're saying there's corruption, but what is the motivation?
Bien. A ciencia cierta y de manera exacta, no sabemos cuál es la razón de la injerencia del Ministerio de Gobierno en este caso. De lo que sí estamos convencidos es que existe una injerencia de parte del Ministerio de Gobierno.
We are unable to say exactly why the Ministry of Government is interfering in this particular case. And what we can say for sure is that it is interfering.
Solo por darle un dato, hoy día en el Wall Street Journal aparece un reportaje que identifica como el fiscal principal al doctor Fernando Rivera. Y el doctor Fernando Rivera no es fiscal. Él es parte del gobierno, no es parte de la fiscalía.
Just to give you a fact, the Wall Street Journal today reported that Attorney Fernando Rivera is a prosecutor in the case. He is not a prosecutor. He works for the government.
Y él interviene directamente en el proceso.
And he is directly interfering in the process.
No sabemos cuál es la razón. Honestamente, no podemos identificar con una evidencia concreta. La evidencia concreta es que sí interfiere.
Yeah, and we don't know.
Other than the obvious that we talked about and that the chairman so eloquently talked about, the president and the State Department, what else can we do to, maybe Mr. Moore, you can speak to this, or any of the panelists, what else can we do in this body?
I think this legislation is a fabulous start. All the pieces really are in place right now. There are international laws that say you can't treat Jacob the way he is being treated. There are Bolivian laws that say that you can't treat him the way he's being treated. There are federal laws that says that the State Department cannot ignore this, nor can the President ignore this. The pieces are all there. Everybody's turning their heads. Everybody's ignoring it. Legislation such as Mr. Smith is proposing is the kind of thing that would take it out of the discretionary area. It is like anything else that people don't want to do. Sometimes you have to have a stick that makes those who don't want to comply. And I think this is essential because, frankly, what Mr. Smith's legislation is doing so well is it is forcing state to do nothing other than what their charter already tells them they must do. But it is holding them responsible for doing it, and at the same time, it is not a blanket punishment of the Bolivian people. such as a funding cut or something that would be a humanitarian issue. This is making the people who are responsible for this responsible for their actions. So I think that's important, and frankly, I would very strongly advocate that there be a strong look at whether there needs to be a department within state that is tasked with following the plight of Americans overseas who are wrongly convicted or who are wrongly held. Again, there needs to be some discretion so that you can say, you know what, this is valid. But even a person who is caught with some drugs in their possession doesn't deserve to be in Palma Sola. There needs to be some type of redress of conditions, and for the innocent, there needs to be aggressive action in their behalf. And that is the one thing state is not doing. State is, in a macro sense, operating in the greater good of America, but they are willing to sacrifice individual Americans on the way to their goals. That's not okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Turner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all the witnesses. While we're trying to bring some light on this matter here, what is the conditions in Bolivia? Is the free press seizing this? Is it a well-known case? Is there any popular movement on the part of Bolivians to rectify this injustice, if indeed they see it that way?
Si me permite, señor representante. Es un caso que paulatinamente ha ido mostrando mayor publicidad. Ahora se habla, ¿no es cierto? Y lamentablemente se lo habla en estos términos, ¿no? Del gringo preso por nada, ¿no? Porque evidentemente no existen razones legales de la detención y eso se ha ido haciendo cada vez más público.
If I may, Representative, the case is slowly becoming more public and reaching more publicity. And now, unfortunately, it is being spoken about in these terms, which is it's the case of the gringo who's been arrested for nothing. Because it's quite clear that, in fact, there is no legal grounds for his detention.
Mr. Montano, do you see it the same way? Do people see this as an injustice, or is there any newspaper or public figure involved?
Durante 7 meses que acompaño a Jacob, lo que me motiva a seguir es que ante todo medio que soy abordado, ante cualquier persona que me acompaña o se dirige hacia mí, me pregunta por Jacob. La prensa constantemente me ha estado buscando. He salido de forma pública a reclamar y a gritarle al pueblo la inocencia de Jacob.
For the 7 months that I have been working with Jacob, what truly motivates me is that any person who approaches me, any person who has any contact with me, asks me about Jacob. The media has started to approach me, and they have started to look for me and to ask me about Jacob. I have embraced the media, and I have spoken as much as possible to talk about these injustices.
Quien le habla, señor miembro, es quizás la persona más cercana a Jacob, porque él ha perdido su familia, Soy quien lo visita permanentemente al penal.
Mr. Representative, yours truly is possibly the person who is closest to Jacob right now. He has suffered a loss of family, and I am the one who is always going to visit him in the jail, in the prison.
Y veo y sigo y voy a continuar en la lucha, muy a pesar de lo que el congresista Smith conoce, la presión que existe sobre nosotros.
And,
No
I,
exi-
and I will continue to see him and to follow through with this, and I will continue fighting for him, even though, as Congressman Smith has already recognized, we are facing difficulties.
Ante su comité y donde tenga que ir, siempre tendré la valentía de decir que Jacob es inocente.
However, I will always be able to go, whether it's before your committee or anywhere else I need to be able to say that Jacob is innocent.
Aun cuando quieran procesarnos por decir en los medios que él es inocente, vamos a continuar trabajando para recuperar la libertad de Jacob.
Even if they want to prosecute or even persecute us, and if they say anything other than Jacob is innocent, we will continue to fight for his freedom.
De vuelta a Bolivia, aceptaremos con el doctor Jerge hablar sobre lo que hemos comparecido ante ustedes.
Upon our return to Bolivia, Mr. Hedge and myself will be open to discussing exactly what we stated here.
Y un dato adicional, aún las personas que lo procesan en este momento a Jacob, fuera de una versión oficial, tienen el descaro de reconocer que él es inocente.
And something else, even those who are unofficially after Jacob have admitted that he's innocent.
Pero, gracias, señor.
Thank you.
I have another, Mr. Moore, you've been on this more than anyone. We had a question before on motive. It's both political and economic, but there is a large amount of inventory, equipment, and money that is not only missing, will probably never be recovered. Could you tell us a bit?
Yes, Mr. Turner. It is true that the land, the crop, millions of dollars of combines, of harvesters, I mean, very high-ticket equipment is simply missing. It's gone. And after confiscating tens of millions of pounds of bagged high-quality rice, the Bolivian government claims, number one, not to know where the rice went, and at the same time declared a rice surplus in the country for the first time in years. Evo Morales is almost obsessively attempting to embarrass capitalism as a concept in kind of a retro Castro-esque type of political agenda. He has recently announced that he will throw Coca-Cola out of the country and is proud that only 2 other countries have ever thrown Coca-Cola out of their country, and that's North Korea and Cuba. He ran an airline, ran the state airline Aerosur out of business because it was a capitalist-based company, and their president, by the way, is now in hiding, I believe in Spain. I'm not going to give his address, but he's in Spain, and he has been charged with the exact same charges as Jacob. Evo Morales despises capitalism, is trying to make a stand against capitalism. The government is corrupt. They are stealing and then trying to stamp out the capitalist system. And frankly, Jacob's business endeavor was so successful that it would have completely laid the lie to Evo Morales' particular brand of socialism.
Okay. I have one quick final question. What is the title of your book, and can I get it down on Kindle?
Yes, sir, thank you. It is called Special Agent Man. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek,
Okay.
and it is available on Kindle, and I'll even sign your Kindle.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Let me ask the two distinguished attorneys, one thing I learned from the trip from you was that presumption of innocence is guaranteed both in the criminal procedure code as well as in the Constitution. And yet early on in Jacob's case, he was presumed in papers that were lodged to be guilty until proven innocent. Could you expand upon that? Is that frequently done, or was that an aberration?
Evidentemente, cuando el fiscal que inició la investigación presentó lo que se denomina la imputación en contra de Jacob, sostuvo que no había demostrado el origen lícito de su dinero.
It seems that when the prosecutor filed the case by filing a complaint against Jacob, the statement was that he had not proven that his finances were legal.
Luego, el juez de la causa sostuvo lo mismo, agregando que en ese delito no rige la presunción de inocencia, cuando eso es completamente falso, toda vez que la presunción de inocencia está prevista tanto en la Constitución Política del Estado Boliviano como también en el Código de Procedimiento Penal.
Later, the judge for the case stated that that particular crime did not have the presumption of innocence as other crimes did. He alleged that this particular crime did not fall under that category, and that is completely false according to the Constitution and according to the Code of Criminal Procedure.
Es inusual que un juez hubiese dicho eso con relación al delito de, o al presunto delito de legitimación de ganancias ilícitas, que es de lo que se lo acusa Jacob.
It is out of the ordinary for a judge to say something like that, especially when addressing the crime, or rather the alleged crime, of money laundering, as Jacob is being accused.
Por eso afirmamos, sin lugar a dudas, que su detención es ilegal y su procesamiento es indebido.
That's why we affirm without a doubt that he is being illegally detained and illegally prosecuted.
Señor presidente, me di a la tarea de revisar los archivos judiciales para encontrar un fallo similar.
Mr. Chair, I took on the task of looking over other similar cases to see if in fact I could find a similar judgment.
Y créame que no encontré, porque esto constituye una ilegalidad.
And believe me when I tell you that I found none, because this is illegal.
Cuya víctima es su ciudadano. Gracias.
And the victim of this illegality is your citizen. Thank you.
So when the UN Human Rights representative says, as you all have noted in your testimonies, that this is common to Bolivians as well, this mistreatment, that is false, at least as it pertains to a presumption of innocence standard.
En Bolivia es común, no digamos común, es usual la violación de derechos humanos. Usted ha visitado, señor presidente, la cárcel de Palmasola y esa es la mayor violación a los derechos humanos. Una cárcel no debe ser el mejor lugar para estar, pero de ningún modo debe ser el peor lugar del mundo.
The situation in Bolivia, unfortunately, it is common that there are violations of human rights. However, Mr. Chairman, you have seen the Palmasola jail. That is a true violation of human rights. And although it is true that a prison should not be the best place for a person to be, it should also not be the worst place in the world.
En el caso del señor Ostreicher, los niveles racionales, digámoslo así, de violación de derechos humanos, si vale el término, han excedido por completo.
In Mr. Ostreicher's case, if we can say that there are rational levels of the violation of human rights, these levels have been exceeded and he has had his human rights violated even more.
Señor presidente, es usual en Bolivia, y esto ha sucedido con el representante de derechos humanos,
Mr. Chair, it is common in Bolivia, and it has happened with the human rights representative,
quien no ha tenido los pantalones para afrontar y decir la verdad.
who has not had the guts to be able to face the music and talk the truth.
¿Por qué lo común tiene que rebasar lo legal? Eso no es aceptable de una organización que supuestamente está destinada a defender los derechos humanos.
And why should that which is commonplace go above and beyond what the law is? That is not something that an international organization should accept.
Estoy seguro de quien escribió ese informe está privado de su conciencia y de su libertad.
I'm sure that the person who wrote that report has this lying heavily on his conscience if he himself is still free.
Gracias.
Thank you.
When I yielded to Emery Burkle, you had not, Mr. Moore, had an opportunity to speak to the egregious inaction and the fact that, if you'd like to, or Miriam or Ms. Weinberger, to this apparent inability on the part of the President of the United States to pick up the phone and make that call and really make, it is about equities, and very often human rights are at the back of the bus, especially with this administration. I was late coming to this hearing because I had a meeting with a man named Chen Quanzhen, and he's the blind activist Chinese lawyer that on 2 occasions, I've been working on his case since 2005, the U.S. Department of State had given him back to the Chinese until he himself said, wait a minute, I need to leave here. My family and I are not safe here. And twice here, we reached him in his hospital in Beijing, and he made an impassioned plea to come to the United States, and only then did I believe that was a game changer, his plea to a congressional hearing. This administration and others that preceded it don't take human rights seriously. It's a talking point. It's an asterisk somewhere. I wrote the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, and I can tell you we had serious opposition to it from the Clinton administration. Serious. Thankfully, it was a bipartisan bill, and it got passed, and we had veto override strength huge. That was huge. I don't understand why this president, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, can't protect or won't protect Americans unjustly incarcerated. And that goes the same for Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Every single day, as has been so amply demonstrated by your testimonies and by the evidence from Jacob himself, his health is deteriorating. As Yemi said, he is a dying man. How could we stand idly by and go campaigning somewhere, important as that is, with an election around the corner, when a man is in such peril? So I again would ask you, I mean, egregious inaction is a very serious charge, and as you very diplomatically put it, the administration has other interests, but aren't American lives preeminent? Aren't they priority number one? Human rights in general ought to be priority number one. Here we're talking about an American. And I would say, before you answer too, to my friends from Bolivia, I had the privilege while I was in both Santa Cruz and La Paz to meet with the prosecutors that are working on anti-human trafficking, both sex trafficking and labor trafficking issues. They were wonderful prosecutors. I mean, people who want to put people who sell and reduce women, especially to commodities, behind bars and confiscate their assets and provide assistance to the victims. They too, some of them, indicated that they feared being prosecuted by rogue government people who don't like if they go across a certain line. But I was deeply impressed. Gave me great hope, and I think Sherry and all of us, that Bolivia has a great future because there are people like the two lawyers that are here today and people the likes of which I met. I also pointed out, and I take your point, Yemi, to heart, when you said that you're embracing the media. I had a press conference with the Bolivian media at U.S. Embassy in La Paz and found them to be very responsive and empathetic. Maybe not all, but very. I pointed out to them that I had been to 2 shelters where Bolivian girls, some as young as 12 and 13 and 14, who had been sold into modern-day slavery, sex trafficking. They had been abused, but were now being helped by the government and by the nuns that run one of those shelters, that my law actually was being used to help them. Some of the money came from the U.S. government because we care about Bolivians, too. Bolivia deserves better than rogue prosecutors that are trying to intimidate, as they are in the case of Jacob and all these judges, passing parade of judges who have to recuse themselves. But, Mr. Moore, if you could speak to that. And again, I do think the more the Bolivian media learns about this unjust incarceration, it ought to provide a pathway for reform for everyone, including Bolivians. No one should be mistreated like this. Everyone is entitled to universally recognized human rights, and your presence here, again, brave and courageous as it is, speaks volumes of the respect that I and others have for Bolivia. You are Bolivia. You care for the rule of law, and I would hope that the government would sit up and take notice and follow your lead, Mr. Moore.
As I worked on the Amanda Knox case in Italy, and what I repeatedly said is that every country in the world will make a mistake judicially. It is not the judge, it is not the measure of a nation whether they will make a judicial mistake. It is the measure of a country what they will do about it. I think Bolivia is a country that has a strong desire to do the right thing. It's just that their government does not. I found out recently that my mother-in-law and one of my wife's aunts go to Bolivia every year and work in a medical clinic there to provide free medical care for people who can't afford it. Some in the city of Santa Cruz near Jacob. I didn't know this until after I had testified. Their question was, can they still go, or have I ruined their ability to go? As far as the State Department's overarching responsibilities for American foreign policy as opposed to individual innocent Americans in prison, I can't help but go back to the analogy of primitive society who every year before planting and before harvest would make a human sacrifice so that it would benefit the rest. We now see that as barbarianism. If we are still sacrificing individual Americans by allowing them to languish in prison so that our foreign policy advances, so that we can get bases in appropriate countries, so that we can try to reestablish relationships with countries, then are we not somewhat barbaric? There is, and I understand this, I empathize with the State Department's dilemma. They are responsible for overarching responsibility for our foreign policy. But I remember the argument after 9/11 when people who disagreed with the Patriot Act said, are we giving up everything we're trying to achieve if we go over the line in giving up personal freedoms? I would put, and I had to answer those questions a lot, I would put it to the State Department, I would put it to the State Department that if we allow Americans to languish in prisons, innocent Americans to languish in prison, aren't we giving away just the thing we're trying to gain? I think something has to be done. Hopefully this legislation will be the first strong step in that direction, which will force the State Department and the good people in the State Department, I don't dislike them, to seriously consider that one American is an American. One America is America. You can't just say that for these people, we'll sacrifice him. That's barbaric.
Mary,
Thank you. Firstly, I would tip my hat to you. I would tip my hat to you for this. I would like to thank you for Jacob's Law. You can't hear me? Oh, time? It's on. Can you hear me now? I want to thank you for Jacob's Law. It's the first two good words I've heard in 15 months. I would like to give you an applause from my whole family for that. You were the first person to actually be proactive in this case, and I don't know how to thank you for that. Really, it means a lot to me to have you in our corner. And I also want to thank the two lawyers for their bravery, and their bravery should be commended. Thank you.
just a couple of questions, and then we'll conclude. And Mr. Turner, if you have anything additional. Okay. Whoever would want to answer this, one of the questions I asked Minister of Governments Romero was, what do you do when there's a rogue prosecutor or rogue prosecutors who may themselves be benefiting from money, a shakedown? And I think that's, Mr. Moore, you talked about shakedown. Even our embassy people have talked about this being a shakedown. Who tracks Jacob's assets? Okay, shakedown, you get it. Okay.
Extortion.
Extortion, better word. And then the next question, I lost my thought. No. If you could speak to that issue first, and hopefully I'll, please. And I thought of it. One of the questions I asked the Minister of Justice was, where's the accounting for all of the stolen property? I mean, first, second, third, fourth, and fifth is get Jacob back. But it is a concern that a huge theft has occurred, and I was told that there are very serious accountings of where that is. Is there? I mean, or is it in somebody's pocket? Rogue prosecutors especially, that's a concern.
Uno de los derechos afectados también del señor Ostreicher ha sido precisamente su patrimonio. No solamente su libertad, no solamente su salud, sino además su patrimonio. Y lo que es peor, el responsable temporalmente de su patrimonio llegó a ser el Ministerio de Gobierno.
Yes, thank you. One of the rights that has been affected, that has been violated, of Mr. Ostreicher, in fact, does have to do with his patrimony. We speak about the right to his freedom and to his health, but it is, in fact, the right to his patrimony and belongings. And one of the ironies of the case is that one of the prosecutors has, in fact, been named to the Ministry of Justice. The interpreter corrects. It's worse than that, that his patrimony is in the hands of the Ministry of the Government.
Siendo el Ministerio de Gobierno responsable, además de las propiedades, además de la maquinaria, del arroz, es decir, de la propia producción del señor Jacob, este ha sido robado prácticamente de las manos del Ministerio de Gobierno.
And since it is the Ministry of Government which is responsible for the property, for his machinery, for the rice itself, it has been practically stolen from him, and it is in the hands of the Ministry of Government.
Y curiosamente, el Ministerio de Gobierno no forma parte de ese juicio, de ese proceso donde el arroz ha sido robado.
Curiously enough, the Ministry of Government is not named in this trial, this prosecution in which the rice has been stolen.
Aun cuando el responsable de ese arroz es el propio Ministerio de Gobierno.
Even when the party responsible for that rice is the Ministry of Government itself.
Lamentablemente, alguien va a tener que responder no solo por la cosecha, sino por la maquinaria, por las tierras y en definitiva por la inversión que ha hecho el señor Ostreicher en Bolivia. Y particularmente no sé si uno o dos fiscales que son los que llevan a su cargo podrán responder por ese daño, que en definitiva deberá ser del Estado boliviano.
Unfortunately, somebody will have to answer for this, for the machinery, the land, and particularly the investment that Mr. Ostreicher has made in Bolivia. I think practically it might be one or two prosecutors who would be asked to respond for these damages, but really it's the Bolivian state.
One final question, and it's more of a technical question. When did the clock begin on the 18 months?
¿Cuándo empezó?
There was some disagreement. Is there disagreement? I mean, does this go until December, or when does it go to? Please.
Bien, como usted bien dice, señor presidente, esa es una pregunta muy técnica desde el punto de vista procesal. Hay que distinguir entre el inicio del proceso penal y el inicio de lo que se llama la etapa de la investigación.
As you say, this is actually a difficult question to ask. It's a very tricky procedural and technical legal question. But what has to happen is we have to make a distinction between the initial of the criminal prosecution and the investigation part of the prosecution.
Este proceso se inició el 28 de diciembre del año 2010.
This prosecution was initiated on December 28th of 2010.
Sin embargo, la etapa de la investigación se inició formalmente el 4 de mayo del 2011.
However, the investigative phase of the prosecution began on May 4th of 2011.
Los 18 meses que usted hace alusión se vencerían, por tanto, en el mes de noviembre del año 2012.
Therefore, the 18 months allowed would expire in November of 2012.
Hasta la fecha, sin embargo, desde el momento en el que Jacob Ostreicher fue detenido, desde el 3 de junio del año 2011, formalmente, me refiero, han transcurrido casi 14 meses.
However, to date, from when he was formally arrested, Mr. Jacob Ostreicher, on June 3rd of 2011, almost 14 months have gone by from that date.
Mr. Moore, I understand you have to catch a plane. Thank you. Thank
Yes,
you
sir,
so much.
thank you.
I do appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for, again, breaking off your schedule to come here at this hearing. Would a delegation of members, since I've returned, I have spoken about Jacob to many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and there is an interest, a growing interest among members of Congress to travel to Bolivia to speak out on behalf of Jacob's freedom. Does that help?
Una de los argumentos del señor Moore era que él decía que nunca había visto tanta inactividad por parte de específicamente la Secretaría de Estado.
One of Mr. Moore's arguments was specifically that he had never before seen such a lack of activity on the part of the Secretary of State.
En estos 14 meses de detención preventiva del señor Ostreicher, hemos visto únicamente la preocupación de su persona y de este comité.
In the 14 months that Jacob Ostreicher has been detained in pretrial detention, we have only seen the concern demonstrated by yourself and this committee.
Creemos que, sin lugar a dudas, cualquier intervención de funcionarios de la jerarquía de su autoridad puede ayudar en la causa de una injusticia como la de Jacob Ostreicher.
However, we do believe that any action, any intervention whatsoever from people of your level would benefit Mr. Ostreicher's case.
Thank you. I would just note for the record that when any of us in government speak out on behalf of an innocent man and promote human rights, we have a duty to protect, a moral duty. We're not doing Jacob a favor by intervening. We're doing what is right and honorable. And again, I can't say enough how much I respect all of you, but to our two distinguished counselors who have come here, you are the future of Bolivia. And I want you to know, on behalf of my colleagues in the U.S. Congress, how much respect we have for you, and that we stand in solidarity with the Bolivian people who deserve better themselves. They deserve freedom and democracy and a due process and a respect for the rule of law that you represent. And I just want you to know how extraordinarily respectful I am of your efforts and who you are. So thank you so very much. And to Miriam and to Ms. Weinberger, thank you again. Your love is what's driving this, and your concern for your husband and for your father. If you have anything you would like to say as I close the hearing, you're welcome to do it. Well, thank you, and we will accelerate our efforts. We hope tomorrow to introduce Jacob's Law. We will start building the co-sponsors for it and look for a markup of the legislation. And I can assure you, I can absolutely assure you, from my point of view and on behalf of many of my colleagues, we will not quit until Jacob is free. Hearing is adjourned.